Welcome, Ajay Sharma, to the 905 podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Yep, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
So, we came across your article in the Star the other day, and immediately struck me as like, here's a guy who agrees with me. We must have him on the podcast immediately.
Right.
Uh, but your piece, good luck, Mississauga, with your new mayor. You're going to need it. I mean, the headline, which is probably written by a sub-editor, implies that it's about the mayor, but really it's about municipal government and the systemic problems with municipal government in Ontario and in the 905. And that's certainly something that's very familiar with us. So as maybe you could just sort of kick us off by kind of giving us the 5-second rundown of the points you were making in your article.
Well, the title was definitely not written by me. The title was "You Get the Government You Demand, Not What You Deserve." And the whole arc of the article was based on the premise that you can go vote. You think you're making an efficient and effective vote in the municipal election, but you're really not, because you don't know what you're voting for and you don't know what your vote really means at the end of the day. Very few people have an understanding of how the system works, what municipalities are responsible for. It's not sexy. You try teaching a course in local government and you'll walk away crying because no one wants to talk about property taxes, MPAC, and potholes, right? They don't. What they want to talk about are other issues such as same-sex marriage, abortion rights, all these, hot button items. And so people don't really, it's a level of government that I often tell, even in class, it's like the level of government that has the most daily direct impact on your life from the second you wake up to the second you go to sleep, if you consider everything you do. But we really don't understand how it works. And moreover, my argument, which got lost, I think, because of the change in the title, is that's by design, because there's no constitutional reference point to it. If you look it up, there's nothing in terms of these are its powers, such as you would find in the United States, where they have constitutionally entrenched in the state constitutions. They don't in Canada. They never have. And the whole role of local government, as insofar as I can see, is just to be an extension of the province, provide services, whatever they may be, but at the same time have some kind of illusion or a facade to a local, popularly elected council. It's a lot different to what you'll find in England, right? It's a lot different to what you'll find in mainland Europe. It's night and day to what you'll find in the United States. And even Premier Ford said, okay, we'll bring in some of these strong mayor powers where a mayor can do something above and beyond what they could. But those are all subject to the province. So ask yourself the following question: what are you really doing?
Yeah. I mean, what has struck me in recent years is the more I learned about how municipalities work, it's like, we don't actually have municipal government in Canada, in Ontario. And this is because of an accident of the Constitution in a lot of ways. Just, literally a line that John A. Macdonald and the guys sort of didn't really think too hard about. That we have this municipalities are creatures of the province. And what does that mean? It means that really municipal governments are sub-departments of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs. It's the minister and the ministry that runs the cities. And you have these like subcommittees. Think of it as a subcommittee of some kind of department that manages Burlington or Mississauga or wherever. Obviously, those subcommittees don't have a lot of power, and they're just, but that's not normal, is it? I mean, perhaps you could speak about that. I mean,
well, if you want to put it into terms that may magnify the absolute awful situation that municipalities and especially cities find themselves in, consider the following. City of Toronto is I think still is the fourth largest city in North America, right? So what's ahead of it? New York, Chicago, I believe, LA, and Mexico City. Yeah, it comes somewhere around there. The city of Toronto has less legislative power than the province of PEI, which is a population of how many? Maybe 140,000? I'm not trying to be facetious towards PEI, believe me. I'm just trying to put it into context here, where PEI gets a massive level of power based on the fact that it's a province within the country of Canada, whereas Toronto, one of the financial hub of this country, and one of the largest, most multicultural metropolitan cities in the world, has less power. in order to affect any type of positive development, whether it be housing, whether it be infrastructure, whether it be economic, it just does not. And so therein lies the problem. If you have like, especially in the GTA area, right? Take a Toronto away from it, the 905 area. Think about the number of people that live here, right? It's in the millions. And if you go to the greater Toronto, Hamilton area, if you take the GTHA and go all the way past Hamilton towards Niagara, that corridor is huge, even more so. But they're still constrained in what they can do. The greatest power they have is land use planning, right? Where do subdivisions go? Where do industrial sites go? Where do commercial entities go? But that can all be overridden by a zoning order by the minister. If they don't like it, it's not going to happen. So that's the problem. There's a real lack of autonomy that municipal politicians have. Mayors don't have it at all. And so that reflects, in my opinion, like a lot of the disenchantment or just disengagement. It's not even disenchantment. It's just disengagement. Like, what do I care?
The thing that we're seeing like on the national stage is, we keep coming back to the housing crisis. It's the biggest problem that we have nationally. And yet everybody like Trudeau, Pierre Poilievre, Doug Ford, everybody just wants to bash mayors. They're touted as gatekeepers because they're holding up all this housing that needs to be built.
Right.
The more we've talked about it, it's just like that is not the case. We've never heard of a single municipality actually stopping dead cold. It is never going to happen. A proposed development. It gets delayed and it gets kind of muddied around a bit. A little maybe less stories, a little bit less square footage or whatever. But in the end, it always gets built to the great profit of a developer. Yet municipalities are always seen as like a whipping horse. Like, well, they're the blame. They're this. And I guess my question is, what's the incentive to actually change this system? Because they're a great source to blame of, hey, things aren't getting done. It's that blasted municipal government. They're gatekeeping. They're blocking the way. They're not letting us get this done. When, quite frankly, I mean, overnight the province could legislate. Nope, this is your plan now. This is where you're putting in this many units, this many housing. You're going to build transit this way, that way, all that.
I'm going to go back a little bit. And the way I'd answer that question, I mean, there's been books written on this topic, right?
Or podcasts.
Or podcasts in a more contemporary era, right?
Yes.
No, for me, my interest in it came from the time when I was a graduate student at Western, and I was sitting in my supervisor at the time was Professor Andrew Sancton. If you want to know how this system works, he's one of the world's leading experts on, the position of municipalities and local government, not only within a federal system, but their competencies and what they can and cannot achieve. And that's just that. I'm not doing him justice by just saying that, but sitting in his class, this nasty term came up, which kind of explains everything to me. And it's called the development charge, right? So once you are you're a municipal government, and you have land use planning and you get zoning, you have the power to zone and regulate subdivision development. Look at where we are. We're in the 905, right? What is it? It is just a subdivision haven, right? And each one of those houses has a dedicated one-time development charge, which in class, I've almost likened to a main line of heroin into a municipal government's veins. It is. The more land you have, the more planning permission you give, that 50, 60, 70,000 development charge per home is going straight into the municipal government's accounts, right? And it's not the developer paying for it. It's you or I. We buy the house, right? The development charge is built into it and you build. And so what we've noticed is they're an easy whipping horse because one, people don't really understand what their position is, but even more critically, allowing municipalities to just go crazy. Look at the way Mississauga was built, just development charge after development charge. It's what it is. It allowed the provincial government to taper back on funding in other areas. Like, oh, your income has gone up, your revenue streams have gone up because you're developing. You don't need money from us. We can cut back. But what you cut back is on maintaining or even improving pre-existing infrastructure. And so it's just it's just feeding the monster once you get started on that. And it's just an easy way out of it. I mean, look at the 413, right? Why are they doing that? It's just an easy way to set up a corridor and say, look, more transit, right? And we'll be able to have, it's a great income stream, great for the local economy. No, it's great for builders. It's great for it's great. They're doing it near me. It used to be pristine, just green area. Like in Mississauga, anything that is green is going to be torn up. That's just the way it is. And a place like Mississauga is in especially big trouble. It's like, what is Mississauga known for? What's its industry? What's its economy? Right? Like what?
And it has existed by building on everything. And now it literally cannot build on everything anymore because everything has been built on. And it's like the whole financial basis of the city has collapsed there.
Right.
What are you supposed to do?
And if you want to take it even more finer than that, if you go back to the previous Conservative government in Ontario under Mike Harris, I mean, in 1996, he ran on the most simplistic populist platform that you could run on, and it resulted in Walkerton, right? Where you had the tainted water and you had multiple people die. Why? Because the provincial government decided to go in and restructure the responsibilities of municipalities. They downsized the Ministry of Environment. They dumped that on to municipalities. How does a small municipality like Walkerton compared to Toronto or, Burlington adequately deal with these tasks of public safety and public health? So gradually there's been a downloading of responsibility. They'll take things that they want because they can. And then by doing so, they're able to put municipalities in this environment in which they are the whipping boy. And the final point I'll say on that is when Harris and others got elected, they said, we're going to lower your taxes, right? He ran on that platform. And it goes back even further than that, but he ran on that saying, fewer politicians, less government, we're going to lower your taxes. Okay, so you reduce the size of the provincial government, right? Okay, you get rid of stuff because you dump it onto the municipalities and you just pay your rate. So your property taxes, you don't know, you're not paying income tax on that. It's on your property tax. So now you go, what are you going to do? You get your property tax bill. If you don't pay, the sheriff is going to lock your house down, right? So you have to do that. And so they did that. And they dumped much more responsibility onto municipalities without giving them increased revenue. So if you want to see why we're here today, you got to go back at least 30 years and see what he did, Harris that is. And people in the city of Toronto are still, through their amalgamation and restructuring are still rightfully complaining about it. People in Ottawa are doing the same. Haldeman, Norfolk.
I want to kind of the article that sparked off this episode was the kind of pointing out the election of Carolyn Parrish to as Mississauga mayor,
right?
And I kind of want to bring it back to that is that campaign that whole election for being the first election that that was really had a contest. There was no heir apparent. There was no incumbent coming in. It was like, wow, there actually is an election happening in Mississauga. You'd think there'd be a ton of just out there ideas and visions, like how do we want the city to grow? How do we want better transit? We want more municipal park, whatever the case may be, the competing visions of the next 4 years for Mississauga. And that never really appeared. There's talk of bike lanes on Bloor Street and freezing of property taxes. That was really like the big contender. And I wonder, like the fact that that our municipalities really don't have any powers. We can't get these robust debates that we want to see happen in our municipalities. So how do we want our cities to grow and accommodate the people who live there? And where this debate actually should be having, like Mississauga should have had that debate of like, what do we want our city to look like? And that we just have this superficial discussion because there is no actual responsibility given to municipalities to say, you may have to raise taxes, or if you want to lower taxes, fine, but you're going to have to forego something else, like an actual political discussion.
I think the link here, I think the crucial step. Well, number one, in terms of the vision, it doesn't help the situation when the, in quotes, presumptive person doesn't even show up to debates, no matter what, right? So what are you supposed to take from that? Oh, you don't even respect the process. you clearly don't if you're not going to show up, you know. And I understand people citing concerns over safety and whatnot debates, but my goodness, they hold candidate debates in Kabul in Afghanistan. You're going to tell me there's not a safety concern there? Have you seen what they do in India and Pakistan? Have you seen what they do in the United States? You want to bring, so come on, don't give me that. And number two, the link hasn't been made. Like, remember I told you, like, the title was What You Demand, Not What You Deserve, right? You need, voters haven't been able to make the link between the fact that who they vote provincially dictates what happens municipally. They haven't made that link. And you can't blame a voter for that, because municipal politicians obscure that reality all the time. Like, how often have you heard Doug Ford talk about municipal issues? Probably when he was like, talking about Patrick Brown, who he still has like this, inferiority complex towards, I would argue. And, whether it's shutting down ranked ballot systems. The only time they talk about municipal politics provincially is when there's a perceived threat to them. Otherwise, what have they actually done? Like, what election have you ever seen a provincial party saying, we have problems at the municipal level, we're going to run a platform, we're going to address that, it's not going to happen overnight, because it doesn't win votes. And that's a problem. So you're stuck. That's the miserable, nihilistic endpoint, right? You're stuck with what you have until a government comes in and does the equivalent in scale of what Mike Harris did.
I literally wrote down a few minutes ago, it was like, I wrote down as a possible question, like, how do we fix this? And it's like, well, that's a stupid question. There is no fix. There is no fix, because there is zero desire at any level of government, including seemingly kind of the municipal level, to actually change any of this.
Well,
sure, if you gave the mayors more powers, they'll take them, as we've seen recently. I mean, such as it was. But there's no concerted sort of demand coming from the mayors, like, this is not a municipal government system. This is right. Ludicrous. We need something better. No, they don't come up with that.
The level of government, I think, that should be absolutely ashamed of itself is the federal government. Absolutely ashamed of what's happened with respect to municipal infrastructure and the structure that we have in place. You can quite clearly understand, yeah, they can't go in and start making social policy in municipalities. They just can't legally do that. But what they can do is set up more efficient financial channels that municipalities can take in, and at the same time enact legislation. Maybe some people say this is crazy, but enact legislation that could penalize a province for doing clawbacks. Oh, you're getting money from the feds, we're going to claw it back. It's the Quebec model, where they say you're prohibited from taking any federal money if you're a municipality in Quebec. Well, who is that helping? But the point that I'd say the federal government has to be utterly ashamed of itself is, in about, is it 2004, when Canada's most forgettable prime minister came in, Paul Martin, and he introduced like his urban plan, which was nice, right? Like, finally somebody's saying, oh my God, it's an urban nation. Over 60% of people live in census metropolitan areas and within 100 miles of the US border. That's just a fact. So let's, whether it's a gas tax, whether it's GST, whatever it may be, infrastructure funds, do it. Well, that was short-lived. But what have we done in the interim? Well, we've cranked up immigration rates. We've expanded that. And now immigration is fueling so many economies, such as education as well. And now that's putting a massive burden on housing. So when you see the people like the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, or if you look at any parties in opposition to the current federal government, whether it be the Harper government prior to that or the Trudeau government, what we're seeing is just the increase in population, but without really giving a damn about the consequences. And that's what the problem is here. We don't really concern ourselves with outcomes or consequences. And now the schools are dealing with it, post-secondary especially, and the college system, right? Really heavily penalized because a lot of their funding is contingent on international students. And the knock-on effect of that is part-time instructors won't get hired because their hiring is a function of students. And then the more students, housing prices increase. Now you can't get a 3-bedroom rental for under $2,500-3,000 in most areas, and that's even cheap. And so you have to like look at, I understand we need population increase, but how are we doing this? And that's the other part of it, right? Like you can look at the whole story arc of what the province has done to municipalities and how it's constrained it. But then on top of that, you have the federal government not doing anything to alleviate it. And so it's what we call a whole of government problem. They're unwilling to work together. And even when they are aligned politically and ideologically the same way, what really gets done? They all have their own turf that they want to protect. And so once again, who suffers? The people that need the services, the people that need to drive to work, the people who are, whose train from, I don't know, the Kitchener station down to through Georgetown into Toronto keeps getting delayed because the track is melted. Right? So,
and it seems like, so back in 2018, I mean, I ran for a council seat in Burlington. Joel, you ran for the school trustee. So we were playing the game, trying to become part of the game.
right.
And that year in Burlington, I'm not going to hold it up as that much of an example because the actual voter turnout was not huge. It was slightly up on previous voter turnout, but marginally so, like 2 or 3%. But that year in Burlington, there were debates in every ward. There were multiple mayoral debates, and a ward, like my ward's debate, had 400 people at it, which was more than they were getting for the mayoral debates in Mississauga. And that was because the person running for mayor then, Marianne Mead Ward, who's now the mayor, had made development and kind of city powers the center of her campaign for a decade at that point. She basically said, we should be allowed to decide what gets built where. Now, problem is, it's nice to run on that, and it got everybody very, very excited. But that's not a power she actually has, and that was what her opponents certainly would have said at the time, and basically it's proven to be true subsequently. But what she did prove is that if you really get your shit together, you can make municipal politics sexy for a lot of people. You can get people motivated enough to get 400 people at a ward debate. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Standing room only, having to close the doors because the fire marshals are saying it's not safe to have any more people here. You can do that. But she's, and again, Mary Mead Ward, lots of different opinions about what she was doing then and what she's been doing since. That's irrelevant to this conversation. What I'm showing is like how you can get people excited about a municipal election. But there's so little of that. We saw, I'm going to pick on Andrea Horvath again because she's another person who's close to home, running for mayoralty, basically without any kind of platform. Her platform was, I'm Andrea Horvath, vote for me. That was it. That was it.
Yeah.
And I mean, but in some ways, that's the most honest platform you can ever have at municipal government, because if you promise anything, if you say I'm going to build a new LRT, if I'm going to do this, then you're lying. You can't do any of those. You don't have those powers. So, I kind of feel both ways about that. So, well, at least she was honest. It's like, vote for me because what else, I don't know. I mean, should we even try to get people excited about this subject? If we wanted a popular podcast, we would not be doing the subject that we do, because it's like we've almost set out to be a minority interest.
Why?
But we feel it's so important.
No, I get it. And the only reason I'm interested in it and was asked to write about it is because I find it incredibly important, to the point of frustration, where people are not participating. I mean, everybody complains about everything every day. Like, oh my God, these potholes. Oh, well, then why don't you vote? It's offensive to hear people say that. Like, if you don't vote, just shut up and that's the other extreme of it, right? You can complain all day long if you go and vote, or even if you're like going to committees and whatever, getting engaged in that way, you have every right to vote. And somebody could say, well, by not voting, I have every right to complain as well. I'm like, well, that's a bit of a paradox right there. You think about that one. And
my mantra, sort of back in the day when I was trying to play the game, was that actually we talk about apathetic votes. It's like, I don't actually believe that people are apathetic. We have conditioned society, or society has conditioned itself to not think it has the power and therefore don't bother.
Right.
But when I speak to, Uncle X or brother-in-law Y, and they're moaning at length for hours on end about how terrible local government is, it's like, well, that's not an apathetic person, but that's a person who feels that they are powerless and that they've had the power taken from them.
Well, that comes down to exactly what kind of we're talking about, is that our system is set up to pass the buck. Like, as you said, Ajay, the federal government could be using its immense fiscal powers to say, hey, this is what provinces need to do. This is, we need to fund sewage infrastructure, stuff like that is like completely not sexy, but definitely needs to happen. And it's kind of like, that's why we're in the problems that we have now, is I can see, is that the need to, okay, let's bring in immigration for our economy. This was not a new problem. We knew this was happening for decades. We could have maybe increased immigration gradually starting decades ago to meet the current issue, or change different policies to encourage birth rates to increase. Like, there's a lot of levers that the governments could have done, but they chose not to, because it's easier to pass the buck down. Same as like the housing crisis that we're facing now. Decades ago, we made the choice of, your house is now your retirement fund. You want a bigger retirement fund? Buy 2 or 3 more houses, rent them out, and then sell them off for a huge profit down the road. And we've realized, oh my God, that has gotten us into the problem now where there's no housing for anyone. Everyone's bought it up, and they're trying to maximize as much rent or the capital gains that they can get off of it for their retirement. And I coincidentally enough, that retirement is now around the corner. And rather than actually like, hey, let's build social programs to help people get to where they want to go, we just kept passing the buck. Oh, just buy real estate. Like, what blows me was always the people ask, like, what's the #1 industry in Canada? And everyone says oil. Alberta oil sands is what fuels coming. It does not. It is a drop in the bucket in this economy. The economy is fueled on real estate. That is the #1 industry in Canada. And like, that blew my mind, but it made sense, because we told everyone that's how you're going to make money.
Right.
And rather than change the game by providing new tools for people for actual productivity, we ended up just passing back down to the municipalities. Oh, you want, buy all this real estate, buy all this housing, but we're not putting anything in terms of creating a city. We're just creating a real estate transaction playing field, basically, is all the 905 is turned into.
I mean, I'm going to ask you a question. Pop quiz. Okay. Where does Canada get the majority of its softwood lumber from for its housing industry?
I would normally
from Canada, wouldn't you? You'd hope, but I'm guessing
I would hope
maybe
be from BC, but I'm going to say it's probably from the United States.
Well, I'm looking at World Bank data right now from 2021. Okay. Where does Canada get most of its lumber from? The United States, 70.96%. China, 12.24%. Now, here's the kicker. Germany, Brazil, France, in descending order, about 1%, right? So we don't have an insignificant softwood lumber industry, right? We've been told, remember, there was a major trade war with the United States over stumpage fees.
Yeah.
So what's going on? So the issue there, I mean, what you're asking in terms of passing the buck down, or the statement that you made about, you know, dumping it off to someone else. I mean, the same thing, the same argument be made that, you know, the boomer generation, you know, ate up all the social benefits and all the capital that we had in order to, for future planning for subsequent generations. But at the end of the day, there's another interesting example that you can draw in to see quite clearly um, what the problem is. So if you go back and look at how not just Canadians, but governments, and not just in Canada, but globally, have treated the environment, right? And if you look at environmental policy, let's just focus in on, I don't know, climate change, the one everybody loves to like bash or support, whatever. And you've seen over successive generations less and less and less protective and preventative measures being put in for the environment. And we keep passing that buck down in terms of what we do, how we use resources, and housing comes right into it, right? And consumerism and our consumer patterns and whatnot. And so we're making decisions today without really giving a damn about what's going to happen tomorrow. And that, you know, works with how we vote, what we buy. And it just boils down to, and this is a term which kind of boggles students' minds, and forget about talking about it to people anywhere else. It's like, people are just interested, it's just self-interest. It truly is. If you resolve it down to its basic points, it's a case of self-interest where people will do what they want to do, and they will buy what they want to buy, and they will not have you tell them what they cannot do. And that was great when there was an abundance. But when the abundance shrinks and shrinks, and there's less to go around, we start to see more deleterious behavior. We start to see more negative outcomes, and people just generally caring less and less and less. And so that's one thing. Like, if you look at just how the reactions to the environment have evolved over time, it's no different to anywhere else where we're continually passing the buck down. How often do you see United Nations panel saying, we're at the tipping point now, we're all going to die if we don't change, if we don't have a 1 degree Celsius clawback? Meanwhile, Apple is selling brand new iPhones, and you can get it for, you know, $1,600 with a trade-in and a 2-year contract, right? So that's the other thing that we have to consider. Like, what are individual self-interests? We're not geared to be collective in a societal sense, right? We don't really care about the other people.
Yeah, and I feel that for most of my adult life, the progressive parties, not just in Canada, around the world,
right,
they lost their ways, putting it much too kindly. If you talk about, you know, we have an environmental crisis approaching, but there's no evidence to us in our day-to-day life that there is an environmental crisis. We just have to take it on trust that this is going to happen because people say it is.
Mm-hmm.
And for some people, that's enough. Mm-hmm. But the whole environmental debate has kind of been, it's been centered around something bad might happen, which is a terrible thing to ever go for an electorate with. And let's be nice to trees and animals and things. It's like, again, no one gives a shit about being nice to trees. Well, some people do, but not enough. You have to
buy organic food at a 50% markup.
Yeah.
Make yourself feel better.
Right? Exactly. You buy it when you feel you can afford it, and then it's like, okay, I'll go back to the regular milk this week because it's a lot cheaper. What they should have done, and it's probably too late to sort of change the narrative now, but the thing you need to do from day one is, like, you need to sell this as this is in your best interest. This is going to save you money. How is it going to save you money?
Well, but they did do that.
Use less energy. Be more efficient.
Right. They tried to do that, but and I'm sure if I mention what it was they were doing, you'll see, oh my God. So you got to incentivize people to behave, right? Like, let's be clear. You have to incentivize. You shouldn't be necessarily, you drive 150 on the 401, you're going to get penalized for driving like, you know, Nigel Mansell. Let's use an old example right there. You're going to be penalized. So you know, you're incentivized. You can only get people to change their behavior if you give them an incentivized environment versus one that will penalize them. And what's one thing they did? Oh, you want to get an electric vehicle? Government will give you a rebate of X thousands of dollars. Okay, great. Now, what's the critical mass of people that can buy those? Very small. But even of the small amount, there are some on that tipping point, right? Who that rebate would push them over the edge to get that car. and thereby taking one more, combustion engine off the road. They stripped that away. The other incentives, they had the the retrofit incentives. Okay, well now builders are required to use much more sustainable, environmentally sustainable materials in their in home building. Whether they do or not, I can't assess that, but that's what they're required to do. And in terms of retrofitting, whether it's your HVAC system or anything, there's so many things that you have to incentivize people to address to make a damn of a difference, that when you add the cumulative time and costs onto somebody living in, I don't know, Burlington or the north end of Mississauga who has to commute downtown Toronto to work, or if they're living in the south, or if they're living in Ward 5, where Carolyn Parish was a councillor on the other side of the airport, from a multi-generational home where everybody's working 2 or 3 jobs. How are you going to do that? Let's be clear, the only people who are going to do it are those who have got a relatively well-to-do income that live in Mississauga or Burlington, and we know what areas they are, and they're the ones who have the disposable income to do something, to say, I feel good, I'm doing something, right?
Yeah.
But everyone else, how are they supposed to do this? And unless you're willing to incentivize people to change, it's not going to happen. And the clearest example is public parks. Okay, so you mentioned, you grew up in England, right? And I grew up in Belfast. And I don't know what year you moved here, but I distinctly remember walking through the streets in Belfast and walking through parks where people would throw their Coke cans, just spit out their gum, just throw rubbish everywhere and let their dogs poop everywhere, right? And the beautiful new park just fell to shit, pardon the pun. It just did. And you had to go, when you go home, you'd have to take off your shoes and scrub them, make sure you got the dog poop and the gum off, right? That's a public park. That's a public good. That's a collective thing for society to use. Why are people in society not just doing the easy thing and taking one gum wrapper off the floor? Why aren't they using the garbage can to put the Coke can in? Now you fast forward here today, look at how society has changed that way. You can walk through a public park and you are, if you're not verbally accosted, people will psychologically shun you if you throw something and don't pick it up, right? Have to go to the waterfront, go to Burlington, there's the pier out there. Like, you'll see people are putting stuff in the car. Why? Because they recognize that you can't do that. And it'll degrade the whole system and the whole public access area. But we haven't gotten there with, whether it's the environment or whether it's housing or whether it's forcing government to make change. Because if you boil it down, what is the cost to you of picking up the Coke, putting the Coke can when you're finished drinking it into the garbage can? Zero cost, right? Okay, it's very easy to do, and you can rationalize that. Now let's scale it up. You want to get an HVAC system that's more energy efficient, you're going to be paying 30% more, right? And so we're looking at issues like that. And you were mentioning, you were saying, well, we needed to incentivize it early, or we needed to get people to get on that early. And I mentioned the electric car rebate that Doug Ford took away.
Yeah. I mean, it's not like they didn't do anything. I just thought, so at a general level, that the explanation of the kind of, we need to do this because it's a good thing, versus if we do this, it will be good for everybody. That you will feel the benefit in your pocket eventually. Right now, you're going to pay more for HVAC.
Right.
In 5 years' time, you're going to pay less for power. That side of things kind of wasn't, that they only did part of the argument, if you like.
But ask yourself the following question, both of you, like, how imaginative do you really think municipal policymakers are? And I'm not trying to demean them. I'm not trying to demean them. Believe me, I'm not. There's a point. There's one clear example I can give you. Like, if you ask them, they come in, they're like, oh, issue A, B, C, and D, right? They say, these are the priorities, and that's it. They're in their box. They'll do it, right? Okay. You're asking, how do they address the environment? One really, really easy way that some municipalities have, I'm not sure about Burlington, change your traffic light bulbs. Just take out the old ones and replace them with LEDs. they burn less, they emit less heat, it's less strain on your grid, and you may only see 0.01 cent saving. But there's a cumulative effect of all these actions, right? Like, it's not pie in the sky reasoning to say that small little things add up to a bigger sum, right? It's not. It happens. And so when you look at things like that, um, and how they're not even equipped enough to think that they can do these things, which people would not even consider having an environmental impact or a quality of life impact or anything like that. If you can't consider that, then what do you really expect? Because you're not going to get it from the provincial government or the federal government. But again, you have to just, it's almost like a ward by ward basis. You got to look at who your counselor is and how invested they are.
Well, isn't that like at the municipal level, it's basically you're electing popular people from just different neighborhoods to sit around the table and make decisions for the whole city. So that's, that's why if you want to talk things like, big projects like transit or getting new industry to come to a city,
right?
It's always viewed in, oh, well, it's always like, well, how's that going to impact my little street? Well,
right.
It's like that.
That's the NIMBY approach, right? Like the NIMBYism.
But it feeds into it because then it's like, well, okay, but I just have to appease, AJ on like Jones Street, and he's going to get 5 people to like me, and I'll get reelected. And, hey,
right.
I just keep doing this for 5 years, every 5 years, and keep doing this. I can make a career out of this for 40 years. That's why we have counselors who sit on city council for like their entire political career. It's like, well, what do you accomplish? Nothing. You just kind of like, yeah, we don't want this park. We don't want this thing done because.
I mean, they could have. I mean, we've had not so many, but we've had examples in Ontario in the past where they've tried to address the voting system municipally, and they always end up coming back to good old, 18th century pluralism, or they with the most votes wins, which is, you look at Parish. I mean, in Mississauga, most of the people that voted in that election voted against her, not necessarily directly against her, but for someone else.
You have an electoral system that guarantees in every election that the wrong person will win.
That is a fair point. That is a very fair point. And then if, for 30 odd years, I don't know how long McCallion like cast this Stalin-esque shadow over Mississauga, right? Someone's going to get upset by that, but whatever. Right? Pick another dictator if that's how you want to go. And, that's what it was. It's like, oh, we got to do what they say, right? But at least in a place like Toronto, like there is mayoral change, and there is, some sort of incentive to change a mayor there. Burlington. I don't know, you guys remember Cam Jackson?
Oh yeah, yes. Yeah.
No, Cam well.
There you go. And then, so you have and look at all the other and sorry, I could have had that on silent. But you have Cam Jackson, but also you're talking about people from careers for life. Look at all the provincial politicians that dropped down to mayorals.
Yeah. Oops. We lost him.
Sorry about that. I just
there we go.
No worries.
But that's just it. Like, instead of municipal government being, a force for change, or a vehicle for change, I should say, instead of force. It's kind of like I find it's weird in Canada. We never really have politicians that level up, right? Like in the United States, you'll have politicians who might be a mayor of their community, and they say, I want to go to become a governor or a state or a senator or maybe even president because I see the problems and I need more power to address it or whatever. And they success and win. In Canada, we don't really do that. Like you kind of failed down.
But it's a nature. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, we've seen in most recently in the provincial level, 2 party leaders, instead of saying, like they failed at their job, they failed to meet their goals, and so they say, okay, instead of saying, I'm gonna take my, ride out in the sunset, and I'm gonna go find a new career to do.
Mhm.
It's like, no, I'm just gonna go. I can go run in Vaughan or in Hamilton, and I don't have to run on a campaign. I just run and say, hey, I'm that guy that you've been electing for the last 20 years or whatever.
Mhm.
Keep doing it, just different job. But that's just kind of the way that it rolls at the moment. You know what? Why don't we we'll just put a pause in it. Let's just pause the recording for the moment.
Thanks. I'll be right back. She's
No worries.
outside.
There you go.
Okay. One of the reasons why you see that difference in Canada versus the United States, a lot, yeah, and a bunch of federal and municipal politicians see municipal government, or sorry, federal and provincial politicians see municipal government as a nice retirement spot. Like look at Denny Cordair. He used to be the mayor of Montreal, and he was a federal cabinet minister under Martin and Trudeau, and people like that. The difference, I guess, is in the United States, it's just the nature of representation. Where in Canada, it's you have your party system; it's very tightly knit together and controlled, and if you're beholden to that, where the United States, it's very much you are an individual affiliated with a party versus a party's individual, right? So there's that inversion, and the nature of it, where local politics means the world there. It's also the evolution of how the two countries developed. I mean, the United States had some people call it domestic terrorism, other people call it a revolution. In Canada, it was like, we don't want to leave the Queen. Right. and
Mhm.
so there's that fragmentation versus thought, and so there's a greater push. You see, yeah, you're right, a lot more people start at the ward council, school board, and get elevated up. I mean, Ronald Reagan, there's one, no, not a great example of a person, but state governor, president, moving
Well,
upwards.
do you want a better version? Barack Obama.
Oh, okay, fine, there you go.
That's a better example of
Yeah,
moving up
right,
the political ladder.
right.
Um,
And then, but then
I-
you have the other version too, Rahm Emanuel, right? Who was a representative in the U.S. House of Representatives, worked for Obama, and then became the mayor of Chicago. Went
but I
right
mean,
back down.
I guess there's something wrong with like that mobility. I just find that it's a trend in Canada though,
Yeah, it
that
is.
instead of kind of, okay, I've been doing this job for a while. I see a problem. I see the problem. I want to go over there and fix it.
Mhm.
It's more just, oh, I don't know what else to do with my life.
Right.
People don't want me doing this anymore. Well, I just, I can walk into mayor. And that's the thing is, like, I don't think Horvath or Del Duca are worrying about any job security for the time being. And that's just, that in itself is, maybe that's a problem with us as the electorate, to say, no, we demand, like, we want results. And instead, all we seem to be content with is, I just want to complain. And I can
Yeah.
blame Del Duca, and I can blame Horvath, or I can blame Olivia Chow in Toronto, or whomever.
Mhm.
But am I actually going to hold into it? Can I say, no, you haven't done what you said you want to do, or what I want you to do? I'm turfing you out, and that doesn't seem to be the Canadian way.
It's
Which
It's so depressing, isn't it? I mean, the depressing thing is it's difficult to see how this will ever change. The system was designed for a nation of sort of gentlemen farmers, and it's like, well, we don't give them any real power because they're basically making decisions about
it's colonialism.
Well, yeah,
It
sort
it,
of
it is. If you
for,
think about
yeah.
it, it is colonial, because Britain didn't want Canada to be on, like, they didn't want Canada to turn into America. So okay, they want their freedom. We'll give it to you, but we still call the shots, and we've just been slowly drawing it back from Great Britain over the course of 100. Well, I think we're coming up on 200 years now. But that's really the history of Canada, is that we are a colonial power through and through. And when people say, "Oh, colonialism, that's a bad word," like, no, like, this is the system. Our system is a colonial system that was not meant to actually give us a lot of power over our own decisions. We have the illusion of power. We have the illusion of trying to create it. And really, I'd say probably since 1982, we actually had the ability to really own it, but we just don't have that mentality yet. We don't have that history of, hey, we have a chance to shape our own destiny, our own system here. And we're more worried about who's going to pay for this. We can't have this nice thing because who's going to pay for it? So how dare we want a program that's going to solve this problem, because who wants to pay for that? Oh no. And now we're left with,
I mean, you
what
can
we have.
you can really, I mean, you can really take it multiple degrees further than that. You could ask a pretty standard question. What's more important to you? Sending X billions of dollars to Ukraine or spending it on roads? It's priorities. It's who's doing the decision making, who's making the priorities. Like, it's somebody at some point in the political system has decided that it's more appropriate to use your money for certain things over others. Meanwhile, the people that need the help the most are continually being put down in a much more desperate situation in access for services, housing, right? And it all comes back to priorities. Is like, what is the overall goal of government? And you can talk to a million. No, let's stop the hyperbole right there, Sharma. You can talk to countless people, and they will say, "Well, this sucks. This sucks. This sucks." So why don't you vote for the NDP? I'm just throwing it as a random example. Right? So why don't you vote? Oh, I can't vote NDP. Why? They're saying everything you want, right? It just goes to the way in which people vote and the way they're conditioned and the way they think they have to vote. It's like, make a decision, make a hard choice. And when it comes to voting, make the choice that you think will give you the best possible outcome. It doesn't have to be immediate. That's the point y'all were making, right? Like, you can enact changes, but you're not going to realize the gains of a energy efficient HVAC in a day. It'll take a few years as your savings accumulate, right? So, why not take a long, but short-termism is the way the system is created. If you look at any way in which a mayor is elected or councillors are elected or any politician, it's all short-termism. There's no incentive. And that's the other thing. Again, how do you get people to do things differently? Provide an incentive structure. But there's no incentive to talk long form or long range. That's why, you could say, well, long form journalism is dead. People just want to read little tweets. They can't be bothered reading 600 words. Give them 180 characters instead, and they'll feel like they have a PhD. Right? So, I mean, that's the other thing. It's just the nature in which society has evolved as well, where people are saying, I've got too many things to do. Really? You wake up, you get yourself changed, you go to work, you come home. How is that different from 200 years ago? If you just put it down to the basic constituent. I'm not saying you don't have a million things to do, but those are all choices. Right? You choose not to engage. You choose not to vote for a party or a politician or an individual that will give you what you want, because you have certain self-interest and that's what you want and that's what you'll do. But you'll never take a long-term, long-term expansive approach to how you vote. And that's why a lot of younger voters are like, what the hell am I voting for? I'm just going to go protest because that's what gets people's attention.
Right.
And if you want something to change, the answer is not to join a political party.
Not at all.
Right.
It's not. It's to go to the beacon of freedom of speech at U of T and be threatened to be kicked off campus because you're protesting something that you believe in, right? Or any other place like that. And that's the only way people. If you look at serious legislative changes to affect society, think about how they've transpired and what the ignition point was. Whether you want to look at civil rights, whether you want to look at equity and equality rights for women, right to vote, anything like that, none of those happened at the source from legislation or a politician standing up and saying we must end segregation or anything like that. It all started up saying, no, this is wrong, and we're marching together. And so there's also that issue too, right? Where now it's almost, people are trying to almost frown upon or criminalize any act of public gathering to protest government and for whatever matter, whether it would be, nuclear deterrence theory or, building the 413. Now, there's a good one, right? The people or Nestle and their water bottling plants in Aberfoyle, right? Which is still there. It's just under different companies there, but it's still there. Nestle just divested itself, but it's still taking up water. And so it just, or land defenders, however you want to call them. So it just, the people who are motivated are to protest and try to enact change are typically the most powerless people in society. They're the most vulnerable, whether it be students or activists, and we tar and feather them for whatever reason. And the ones that can enact change, well, we kind of just sit back and say, oh, I'm living a good life. What do you know?
Well,
it's probably a good point to draw it to a close. It's one of those conversations where we could definitely talk all day, as the cliche goes. Definitely true. So really enjoyed the conversation. Ajay Sharma, thanks so much for joining us.
You're very welcome.